Guy Podjarny might be the most successful DevTools founder I've ever met. In 2012, he sold Blaze to Akamai and became their CTO. He then founded Snyk, a dependency scanning tool that is worth billions of dollars. I've used it heavily and it's great. So when Guy does something, you pay attention. Guy believes the future of programming will be writing specs, as in like YAML files. And AI will write code to that spec and maintain it. His new company, Tessl, is very different to Cursor and Copilot, but he's raised $125 million and there is a ton of excitement around what he's building. In this conversation, Guy lays out what he calls AI native development and the future of programming or whatever it is that we do to build software. A lot of people are building kind of like the Tesla dev tool of like helping the drivers drive better, building a nicer experience to code in that sense. And it seems like you're more thinking about like what does it look like if you don't need a driver?
Yeah.
Would that be?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe even more is like it's not so much just if you don't need a driver, but also like should this car, I don't know, maybe it's more teleportation or sort of or like the flying car. Yeah. Well, so I think I wrote this blog post about it, charting your AI native journey, and I think you can think about kind of AI startups. Probably true to an extent to any startup, but focusing on AI is easier across these sort of two dimensions, right? One is a dimension of trust that goes from attended to autonomous, yes. And that's like how much do you need to trust a tool to work for it to be useful for you, and the other is an axis of change of how much do I need to change how I work to be able to use this tool. So maybe let's talk about a few examples on it, and we can talk about DevTools in the context of it. So when you think about the kind of the bottom left quadrant is sort of low change, low trust. It's things that work within your existing workflows, and they do not. You can kind of eyeball them and sort of see that they are correct and choose when to say yes and when not.
Would you say Snyk was like a really good example because it was like kind of integrated into like?
I think to a large degree because it was it's sort of built into the way you work, and in fact a lot of the premise of Snyk was that if you want developers to embrace security, you have to build a developer tooling company, not a security company, and that adapts to how developers work, and so it comes into the pipeline, comes into the IDE. And sort of tells you, hey, there's a problem here, and makes it easy to act on it. I think in the AI world, you sort of see all the coding assistants are like probably the best examples of those. And in general, like assistants are a good measure because you say, okay, here's a piece of help, a completion of your code, a proposal for a fix of a bug, a test that I created, and they have to be bite-sized. They have to be small so that you can eyeball them and easily review them. And then if you so said yes, then you continue, and they just make you more productive to the extent that they don't give you noise, not that they give you kind of valuable information. Then I think that's very valuable. So that's kind of the bottom left quadrant, and it's where most of the AI kind of tools as a whole sit because it's easy to adopt them because you don't need trust and you don't need to change. And it includes in the developer world. I think the path around sort of the Waymo and the Tesla as such, is going up that autonomy kind of axis, right? And so some of that is around kind of the nature of the task that you do. And so if you think about Intercom's support agent, that's like an autonomous support agent. It interacts with the user and it gives them the answer or whatever, like as a support chat. So it's low change because users are already interacting through a chat interface with the support entity. But it is like if you need a human on the kind of customer side to review every response to before, if you need it to be an attended process, then you lose all the value from that support agent. And so you need you need to trust that it would get it right to be able to use it. And in the self-driving car world, the robotaxis are a good example of that because you call an Uber. Not here in the UK, but in San Fran or others. Open an Uber, you call a cab, you go into a car, it arrives, you go into the car, it drops you off where you need. It's like the same as a human driver, but massive trust, right? You're kind of entrusting your life with in the AI. And so I think those are like IP routes. It's really about, can you, like the moat over there, if you're building a company, is about intellectual property. Because the workflow hasn't changed. So Uber in this context, has the same kind of power, the same kind of control of the distribution. And so in theory, if you think about Uber and Waymo and their partnership right now, which is kind of interesting, it makes sense if Uber thinks, well, I don't think I can replicate what Waymo is doing. I can't really get to that IP. It's very hard. And so I will instead call into Waymo, and maybe the other way around as well. It doesn't make sense if you think, hey, I can actually do this myself. And so when you think in dev about all sorts of attempts at autonomy, you go from the kind of the more lightweight, just sort of bigger tasks. Say I will convert all of your code base from whatever Spring version A to version B. And they don't really claim full autonomy, but if it's a big task, then it needs to be somewhat autonomous, because if you have to review every change, then it's no good. Or test creation, I think, is another example. So you see some of those, but mostly I think what you see in dev is you see attended processes that just try to take bigger and bigger chunks. And then you have the big ambitions like Cognition's, Devin, and they veer a little bit into the change trust, the change axis that we can discuss, but they talk about autonomous tasks. And I think that autonomy thing is like, that autonomy path, I think, is just a very hard path for startups to take. So if you're building a dev tool today, you're building kind of an AI dev tool, then the bottom left quadrant makes sense. It's just, you should expect 10,000 other companies to be doing the same thing. And you should appreciate that while you need to build a good product, you really have to build an amazing GTM. And it may be better off to build it to accumulate some quick traction and then sell it to an incumbent, because you're not really changing who has control over the workflow. So if you're still working in GitHub's world, in whatever the existing IDEs, existing build systems and all that, and you're just creating tests or just creating something, then it's a bit hard to say, you would need the incumbents to be much slower for you to actually gain distribution. But I think there's still a role to play here at the bottom left. But if you go to the IP route, you go to the top right, it's really hard. Like, it's going to be hard for you to build that IP, and it's going to take a while. And eventually, if it's mimicable by the incumbent, you're not going to be in a strong position. So you should only do that if you really think that the IP that you are building is truly hard to replicate.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. At some point, you're going to land a big customer and they're going to ask you for enterprise features. That's where WorkOS comes in, because they give you these features out the box. Features like skim provisioning, SAML authentication, and audit logs. They have an easy-to-use API, and they're trusted by big dev tools like Vercel, as well as smaller, fast-growing dev tools like Knock. So if you're looking to cross the enterprise chasm and make yourself enterprise ready, check out WorkOS. We've also done an episode with Michael, the founder of WorkOS, where he shares a lot of tips around crossing the enterprise chasm, landing your first enterprise deals, and making sure that you're ready for them. Thanks, WorkOS, for sponsoring the podcast, and back to the show.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so I guess kind of playing that back, it's like the bottom left, it's people can adopt it and you can get something out there that's like useful, and people don't need to trust you that much.
Correct, because it's small. You can, because they can just review them and attend to it easily.
See that it works, and
So as long as the advice makes sense most of the time, it's quite useful.
Yeah, but they may struggle because of all the competition, the distribution, and it's probably, I guess you're like reading between the lines, maybe Cursor's going to be bought by GitHub at some point, or that sort of thing. And
it's interesting. You have to think about Cursor is interesting. They're really competing. They made a bold choice to say, we're not changing the methodology, but we are not going to be where you are. We're going to require you to replace your IDE, and that is a change that is different to most of the existing coding assistants that integrate into where you are. So they actually embraced a little bit of a change, but their IDE is just a fork of VS Code, and so it's not a dramatic change. It's a choice of a tool, and they support it. But they create a dependency on VS Code, and there are actually all these indications about how there's definitely an opportunity for the VS Code team, who's clearly kind of comes out of GitHub and Microsoft, to make it harder to fork. For instance, I don't know that they would do it, but like VS Code can choose to change its license.
Yeah.
And now suddenly the Cursor team has to support and maintain all the forks, all the maintenance of VS Code itself. Right now they're riding on it with their fork.
Yeah, it's in kind of a...
So it's a little bit of a change. If you compare it to Augment or to Kodi from SourceGraph or to Tab9, they integrate into the existing IDE that you have. And so they give you code assistance. But what is their sort of defense against Copilot or the Microsoft? It's purely in how good their completions are. And the incumbent has time. But the classic race that happens with startups is, does the incumbent gain innovation faster than the innovator gains distribution?
Yeah.
That's the equation. And then how entrenched is the distribution that you got as the disruptor? So maybe I can talk about the change route.
Is that useful? Yeah.
So the change axis is a little different, and I think probably the easiest example there is the text to video example.
Yeah.
It's a bit harder actually to imagine it in dev, and that's what we're doing at Tessl. Yeah. But in text to video, it's an entirely new way of creating videos. There is basically zero chance that the current incumbents in video production will win the race in text to video, like in production, because it is just entirely different. It's not about getting extras and production setups and video and cameramen and so maybe there's pieces of the pipeline that are similar, but most of it is entirely different. And so companies like Synthesia, for instance, are they're creating a new flow. This change makes it harder for teams to adopt. It's harder for an existing studio that produces whatever, a little clip or a movie or something. We have to think about, how would I produce this? The levels of control that they have are different. Things that used to be easy to do are now hard, and things that used to be hard are now easy. So there's just a lot of learning. There's a lot of fear for your job and your change. So the humans delay it, and it's harder to penetrate, and it might not yield the short-term reward as a company. And Synthesia specifically has chosen a smart path, focusing on training videos, like whatever the McDonald's training video to all of its employees in all of the countries and all of that, where there's just a more acute pain of wanting that in different languages, wanting that to be updated frequently. And so people are willing to take on that challenge, and that has led to a lot of success. And their ambitions are greater than that, but they start there.
That's the least human resisted change.
You need motivation. People resist the change, and so you need to provide some immediate gain that is really necessary. But then if they do succeed, they have an opportunity to actually lead that market. Again, they don't really need to fear the existing video production companies. As someone that will see what they've done and mimic it and have better leverage. Legal tech, I think, is an interesting one as well. Like, on one hand, a world in which there's a lot of data and such within the legal companies. To be able to train AI models that would actually be quite good as a lawyer. At the same time, those companies are controlled by the very same people that are concerns for their jobs and are, I guess, kind of disinclined to think that a system can do their job. And from a consumer perspective, consulting a system to tell you about what it, like when you work with a lawyer, you get legal advice and you get pointed out a bunch of things, but you also kind of get a bit of this reassurance.
It's like almost like therapy, like it's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
We're going to handle this for you.
And I got to say, you also get like a little bit of like a legal like accountability. Like, you can go and tell your investors, it's okay. I consulted a lawyer. Like, these good lawyers have said that this is okay, so it's okay. And so it's actually quite fear-inducing to think that you would consult it. So it's a little bit of change. It's actually not a lot of change in how you would interact, but it's some change because you don't go talk to a person. You have to interact with the system and work with it. And it is a lot of trust. But again, I don't think the risk of the incumbents are there. So this sort of change axis is really, if the trust axis is a little bit of humans, but a lot of it is tech. How do you make the tech reliably work and get the right results? And then how do you convince people, the humans, that it's correct? The change requires the humans to change. And that is harder to achieve, but more durable once achieved. And in dev, I guess in Tessl, I don't know if should we talk about Tessl?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So in Tessl, what we're trying to do is we're saying, okay, the existing AI dev tools are very good at supercharging the existing activities, but by doing so, they actually I think they have like a local maxima that they might hit, and also they're not necessarily tapping into the full potential of AI. So I'm a big fan of these tools, and I recommend that people use them. So I'm not at all opposed to them. And I think some of the innovations in the tech that come from there will enable also the future. So it's not like some waste of time. But today, a lot of them are mostly a new UX to create code.
Yes.
They're a different way. Like I will create code I can create code by hitting tab, by accepting a pull request that a machine has provided me, or a variety of those reasons. But eventually, the way the system operates post remains the same, and it remains code centric. So the code over time, the code accumulates new requirements, new changes, new kind of enhancements, migrations. All of the history is in the code. The code is the only thing that matters in the system, right? Like your docs and all those, they're all descriptive of the code. They fall out of line. But it's a thankless job to update the documentation. There's no functional forcing function to actually kind of make you do that. And so the source of truth, the canonical artifact in software development is the code, right?
Yeah,
like good luck 2 years after.
Docs are keeping up with the code.
And oftentimes like the requirements, you think like 2 years in, like good luck finding the requirements that led to the elements. I like the analogy of like you go into a house and you look around and it says, oh, there's this sofa over here, or there's curtains and they don't really match, and there's this kind of crack on the wall. There's a bit of an odd pillar somewhere in it, and you don't know like that the curtains are a family heirloom that you cannot.
There's a reason.
There's a reason there, but the sofa was just moved from the previous place you lived in, and you'd be happy to sort of shed that. And the column is actually a supporting column, or was it just again a design choice? And you just don't know. Like you come along, and this is just the house. And so when the LLMs or humans read the code, that's the reality they face. They just see reality. And they have to deduce out of how the application works, what the application is supposed to do, and logics. And so we see an opportunity to flip that around with LLMs and to create a new way of producing software that is spec-centric, in which you will have a canonical artifact would be a specification, which loosely said it would be what it is that you want to do and some validations. Like I want to create this e-commerce site, and here are some questions, like when someone adds something to the shopping cart and hits checkout, I want to see that the balance has been reduced, or a bunch of those. I'm clearly oversimplifying, but the core of it is some behaviors and some validations associated with them that will evolve over time, and there's something we need to kind of figure out. How do we specify? And the intent is for the spec to tap into the flexibility of the LLMs to allow you to use the fact that it's easier than ever to say what you want to the LLM, but counter the fact that it's also like probabilistic, it's not factual, and really lean into the fact that LLMs can fill in the gaps. And we can come back to that. But I think if you define the spec and you define the validations, and you've basically defined the degrees of freedom of saying this is like the essence of my software. This is what it is supposed to do. Here is how I would ground it in truth. It's like here are the validations that say this is correct. It allows you to now build a development process that revolves around the functionality versus the implementation. and then the code becomes disposable. Like you generate the code with AI, and once you're happy with it, like once the spec conformance tests have passed and maybe a few more, then you're good. You can throw the code away. You can create new ones, and suddenly that opens up. Hey, I can create code in Python or in JavaScript. I can create something for AWS or for GCP. I can create something that is low latency or low cost, depending on my needs. I can tap into probabilistic improvements, like an LLM, again, that would come along and say, find vulnerabilities and fix those vulnerabilities in my code. And maybe in the process I break it. That's the reason, that's the holdback today, is like, what, did it break the application in the process? And having that validation, that sort of foundation, allows you to say, well, no, it didn't break it. And so this sort of anchoring in what is correct and what is the desired behavior, and an ability to define the degrees of freedom really unlocks like a lot of opportunity. But to achieve that, you have to figure out good techniques to say, how do you deal with the lack of predictability? You get high adaptability and low predictability, and that's really, I think, where we stand, and what we think the future of development would be is, on one hand, you have code as it stands today, which is highly predictable, but very much not adaptable. Like you have to work hard, it's fragile, it's different. On the other side, you have this like go to Anthropic and like type in a prompt or whatever and get some application come out where you have no control. It's like next time you're going to add a menu item and it might change the layout and it might break the checkout action, and there is no grounding in truth. And the idea of the spec is, in simple form, is to say like create these like repositories of truth, in the process, that are not just a prompt, they're not just an ask, they're a specification, and accrue mileage on those specs. So like learnings and scars and edge cases and all those, they accrue to the spec. And so those specs become like software matures, the specs mature, and they represent what it is. And so it taps into that magical, easy creation, but it gives you some of the rigor. And finding that out, I think, is a new development, like we call it a new development paradigm, a new approach to how you would develop software that really revolves around defining the spec, around having systems that are able to understand your requirements without being too laborious. So LLMs today, you can tell an LLM to create a tic-tac-toe game without telling it the rules of tic-tac-toe. And that has never been the case. So how do you deal with that? How do you know which decisions the LLM has made? How do you separate between, like, when do you want to persist to those decisions? You said, I want a button. The LLM said that button is red. It's just like, fine, I don't care. But you don't want the button to turn green next time you change a word on the page. And so how do you persist to those decisions? Sometimes you don't want to persist to those decisions. So managing those degrees of freedom and figuring out how do you specify those is I guess what we see as the craft of software development in the future. So there's a very long answer.
It is super interesting. The way I was thinking about it, and I'd love to hear if this is how you think about it at all, but is like kind of Vercel building kind of the Vercel of the future with like V0 so like you can say like generate a website where I can play tic-tac-toe and it can build that for you and deploy it and it's there, and that's like a great experience. And it seems like what you're trying to build is more like the V0 where you can build like a banking application or something. It's more like the Vercel building the Vercel of the future, and you're building like the AWS of the future in a sense of like this. Is that sort of in any way?
It's a interesting kind of analogy of the future. I think Vercel runs a platform that is more structured, it's more opinionated. And so when they use V0, which is amazing, you create an application within this opinionated structure. And once that has been created, There's still no interim artifact that represents the decisions that you've made. So Vercel creates, V0 creates the React application or whatever it is that they've created, and then next time when you ask Vercel to change it with AI, it needs to understand from the code what has happened and work with it. And so to some extent, it has the same challenges of this. It needs to look at the code and kind of reverse engineer what was, the logic behind it. And it's similarly lossy. So V0 is new, all of this stuff is new, but in 3 years' time, the prompt that created the changes, they disappear. They're not a versioned resource. They're not associated with anything. And so there will still be the problem of, like, why is this here? Yeah. Was this just like a random decision by the LLM at the time, or was this a user explicit requirement? And but where it's easier for them is that it's easier to at least understand the system because it's a bit more declarative, and it's because they're working in a more opinionated surrounding. And so I guess my prediction is that many of these tools and platforms will naturally end up embracing specs within them. Like, I don't think spec-centric development is a Tessl only thing. Like, we're going to build a platform, we want to kind of help form the movement and build it out. But we think there will be many tools that will evolve into this methodology, because I think as these applications grow, someone will say, hey, you've created this thing, but I want to be able to say, like, keep this piece over here. I want it stable. I want to be able to specify some core of this behavior, and I want to define a few tests that help the LLM wrapped by V0 or others, like, ensure that is grounded in truth, right? That remains there, and then it expands. And so I think most of these tools, once they get past the initial creation, they will discover the need for creating specs, and maybe those specs look very differently. Maybe some specs are just conversation threads and such, but it's hard for me to imagine how they don't.
Yeah, the specs is interesting. It's like it almost sounds like, you were talking about, as you said, there'd be different types of specs, and I'm almost thinking there's like, there's designs, and you can put in like almost like images into the specs and stuff like that. And like, do you see these being very, like, these aren't just like a YAML file? These are like kind of.
Yeah, for sure. I think specs. I think there will be many specs, just like there are many programming languages, and I think the way to specify a mobile game is very different than the way you would specify a crypto contract or a pacemaker or a SaaS application, or and so I think there will be different specs. I think specs will compose just like software composes, because even in these examples, it might be that crypto contract has some SaaS app around it, and so you might compose different types of specs. And I think you really lose a lot if you don't tap into the versatility of how you can express what you want built that the LLMs offer. And so, I think you would have specs of a varying level of looseness, if you will, right? It could be that if you want something algorithmic, it's pseudocode. It's really quite detailed.
Yeah.
And if you want something broader, then you might lose the language. And in some cases, if you want to say this is a design system, then you might express that design system or design constraints. So I think they would evolve. It's interesting to also think about how good the platform is at understanding what you meant.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my big questions. Is this because it's almost like you've got how well you can describe it, and it's like, is there, like, let's say I build something and there's a bug. It's like, is there a bug because my spec was bad, or is it a bug because, let's say there's like something with Tessl not quite right, what is the kind of like, because you're not exposing anything to them in that sense, or are you like?
Well, I think it has to be transparent. So we don't have, the platform is not out yet because we're still experimenting, right? We have a lot of a lot of ideas. We have some principles. We're building them out. We're trying them out. Some prove out to be bad. We build them. And so we have this sort of core conviction and increasing clarity about what a spec is. But we still think that there's a journey to be had here. But generally, what we think is that it's important to be able to capture the LLM decisions in a spec of its own, and be able to say, here are the decisions that the user has made, and here are the subsequent decisions the LLM has made, and to allow the user to interact with it. And if the system is very good, then most of the time you don't need to interact with it. So maybe you interact with it as a bug, but also maybe those decisions are questions. When you go from JavaScript to Python, as like two versions of your software, how much do you care? Like, you care that they would be the same in what's in the user spec. You shouldn't care that it's the same. Like, maybe one of them throws an exception when there's an error and another returns -1. If they are used in two different ecosystems, you might not care. You might allow that degree of freedom. But within the evolution of the JavaScript version, you want to say, no, I want to persist those decisions, because someone using it right now would otherwise have a failed change. And so you need these LLM decisions both for the kind of the human need to interact with and attend for debugging purposes, but also for evolution of the software over time. And so they have to be transparent. They have to be open and available to you. And if you really cast your eyes further, you can think about personalized software. So you think about software that says, well, when you browse your site, you really like, I don't know, like minimalist UI. And someone else, prefers to have like more luxurious or like, more decorated one. And it could be that you can express that preference and that the LLM can create these multiple versions for you, which is within its reach. But it needs to know what's the sandbox, what is it allowed to change and what is it not allowed to change. Today, humans will define that with some responsive design or investments. But I think with the LLMs, you want more adaptability. Once again, you have to ground it in truth. You have to define the boundaries. But I think what's important is that the platforms will get better over time at understanding you, right? If you work with an agency and you build I like them like a simple marketing website analogy, right? If you've built 5 marketing websites for me and I'm asking you to build a 6th, then I need to give you a very short spec, because you know me, you know the domain, and it's easy. I don't need to tell you much. If I've never worked with you before, I will need to tell you a bit more. If you've never built a marketing website before, I will need to tell you some more. Right? If I want it to be more eccentric versus usual, I will need to tell you more. If it's if I'm asking you to build a more mission critical system, I will need to give you more. But generally, you would learn. You learn a domain, and you learn a person or a need or an organization, and that helps you. It's like the best developer in the team versus the newest developer. Like, what is the organizational context that they have? What is kind of the historical knowledge they have? So similarly with the LLMs, hopefully over time they both learn domains. So that, hey, in this domain, it's just very, very good at creating whatever crypto contracts, right? Or AWS Terraform scripts that relate to AWS, and then they learn you, a person, you, an organization. They learn preferences, they learn constraints, they can evolve that learning. And so increasingly it allows the specs to be simple, to be more concise. And that's sort of interesting because it becomes dependent on the decision-making of the LLM. And that was that sort of third unlock, right? We talked about these 3 unlocks of why spec-centric development is made possible. One is it's easiest than ever to say what you want. 2 is that machines can write code. And the third is that LLMs can fill in the gaps. And the better they are, the more black boxy it is. And so you can choose, unlike the current systems. So I host the AI Native Dev podcast.
Yeah, that's good.
And I had the pleasure of talking to Simon Last, who's the co-founder of Notion. And he was pointing out that fine-tuning, he finds, is a bit overblown, and that it's actually very hard to use. And notably, it's very hard to debug, because in fine-tuning, what you would do is you would provide the LLM or the model with a whole bunch of correct and incorrect answers. Like here's the input, and here's a good type of answer, here's a bad answer. And the problem is, like, you do that, you inform the system about it, the system gets smarter, but when it doesn't work, what can you do? And if you contrast that to something that's maybe more of an agentic workflow, then you can say, okay, I want to specify that when this happens, then I want to survey or critique the results and come back. And so when something doesn't happen, you can see where in the flow things broke down and it went down the wrong route, and you can invest in that area. And I think that comparison talks about like the former maybe is more magical, but you're really quite dependent on the black box. The latter allows you more control. You can choose your levels of control. And so when we think about spec-centric development, there will be a gradient. You should be able to lean onto magical systems and require less grounding for them. Maybe not that far from just going to Anthropic and prompting something today. When something is simple enough, well known enough, sort of, and you know, like maybe like low repercussions, but you should have a gradient of control as you approach, like to be able to actually make this be the way you develop software.
Yeah, this is very interesting. One of the things that I kind of wanted to ask you is like getting into the future again. Maybe this whole episode is just gonna be in living in the future, but you know, let's say like 10, 20 years time, you achieve what you set out to with Tessl, and it's the way to build. If there's like a startup and we've got two founders building a startup in the future, and maybe it's like an AI boyfriend girlfriend dating app or something, if that isn't already out there, what skill sets are needed at that point, and what does it look like when they're building with Tessl?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would first of all sort of say that, you know, we'd like Tessl to be, you know, the leader in AI native software development, but we do think that it is a movement and it is bigger than just Tessl. So they might be building with Tessl, hopefully, and they might just be building, you know, using AI native development and maybe using some other tools in the process. So I think there are two aspects to your question. One is, what are the skills that they would need to be able to build what they want? And I do think that AI native development extends or expands who is able to create software. And in that sense, they might be able to get away without like full-on development, and it depends on what it is that they build. Especially if they build something that that isn't like entirely technologically novel. Their innovation is elsewhere. It's about the data that they have access to, or it's about the go-to-market approach, or it's about the niche that they serve. And so in those cases, I think they might be able to make do with less technical skills. They would still need to have product skills. So they would still need to understand what is the product, what are some trade-offs. There are things like, do you want it to be more extensible or simpler? Yeah, those are choices. They would need to make some choices around our architecture. Do you want to really be all in on AWS and maximize everything you can do, or do you want it to be kind of cross-cloud, kind of portable? And so those are core decisions, but they might be able to do that. But if they are trying to do something that's more technically deep, and maybe this is the second aspect of the question, is I do think that there will still be a development craft. And I think, when there are many C developers or C++ developers that think that JavaScript developers are not real developers, right? And it's I think they're absolutely wrong. They are developers, but there are levels of and types of skills that you would have around the granularity of your control. And so I do think that for things that are a bit more innovative, a bit more elaborate, more of these trade-offs, broader and bigger systems, there will still very much be a need for software developers that can produce better, produce more innovative software using this approach. And I like an example that maybe illustrates this is if you think, early mid 2000s, building a rich website with like dynamic behavior and these kind of single page apps that exist back then. That would have required like a lot of work, and a very small select set of organizations were able to invest. The Facebooks of the world. It's like, okay, they can afford to do this, but the rest they only few people had the expertise and the time to do that. Fast forward to today, it's a lot easier to create those types of apps. And And that's great. But it also means that now consumers expect those types of apps. Now, if you have a website that is from the mid 2000s, from like 2005, whatever it is, it feels old, it feels archaic. And so consumer expectations and like user expectations, enterprise expectations, they grow. And so as we are able to produce more software, there will still be kind of the organizations that are that excel on the technology side, on the software creation side, and that would manifest. And as it gets easier and easier, demands will grow accordingly. I want my software more personalized. I want my software more, I don't know, like proactive. I want, I want better assurances around things working and not working. And I don't know, maybe things that I don't even know how to describe today. And so I think the opportunities will grow with the ease of creation. Ben Galbraith, our head of product, uses the word leverage a lot, which I like. Developers will have more leverage, and therefore, with a small level of effort, you'd be able to produce substantial outcome. But there's still a difference whether you doubled that initial effort or not. You're still able to produce very substantially different outcomes. So I think that would still be the case.
Effort still has reward. It's just that
exactly, yeah.
It has more.
But if you want to just cross a line to say, hey, I just whatever it is, I want an application to manage my personal finances or whatever, help my kid organize their homework setups, or even for a business, I want something that tracks, whatever it is, the flow of goods within my factory. And then those might be things that you can produce 100 times faster with a lot less skill. And I think that's an exciting future. Like I think that's a place that allows more creation. So just like AI does in images and in video and in audio, it's scary, it's different, you don't really know what the destination is. But generally, I think AI simplifies creation and democratizes creation. And software creation is an important aspect of that.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I realized that you've got to go. But Guy, it was so nice to chat with you. And I'm very, very excited about Tessl. And where can people learn more?
Well, thank you. Great to be here and sharing it. I think right now, if you go to tessl.io or .ai, it will just redirect you to .io because it is still the dev platform. Then you can register to the waitlist. You can sign up to the newsletter, or you can subscribe to the podcast. They're all kind of a part of the same mix to just sort of be part of this nascent creation. And very much would love people to join our Discord, AI Native Dev, because we think again this is a movement and people have opinions, and you should have a voice, or you have an opportunity to shape the future of your profession. And I think I don't think like we're providing the stage for it. We're helping, but fundamentally it's the community that should dictate where this heads. So would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think everyone building a dev tool should be keeping at least one foot in your community just to understand what's going on.
And I should maybe like one last word there is that we do think there's a whole domain of conversation about whether AI will drive us towards closed ecosystems versus open. The more you are in that magic box that just magically knows what it is that you want, the harder it is for other dev tools to plug in and extend and say, I will do this step in this 30-step process much better, and I will specialize at that. And I think that's a concern. I think we want to make sure that there is a thriving world of developer tools that compose together so that every consumer of them would be able to build the right thing. And that's definitely how we're building Tessl. And I think it's something we just need to be mindful of how do we collaborate right now. I think today you look at a lot of the AI dev tools and they all try to do everything. Part of it is just we're learning, but we're trying to think about it more as a composable system. So what you can expect from us is that one is we want to give you a stage. We'll kind of help you air. If you're building an AI dev tool today, we'll help you share what you're building. And two is that as we kind of build our platform and put it out there, you'd be able to plug in and say, hey, if I am amazing at creating tests or at creating this documentation and optimizing it, the specific stack and whatever, you will be able to
plug in,
connect that superpower into the full platform. So a lot to build, and hope to see everybody on the community.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, thanks again, Guy, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.